Hi, I'm Mark Kelley from the Fifth Estate, and welcome to this Q&A as we're dealing with our last program on the Fifth Estate, which was Tainted Tests and Broken Families, as we were looking into the scandal surrounding the Motherisk hair testing lab at the Sick Kids Hospital here in Toronto. Joining me, Rachel Mendleson from the Toronto Star, John Chipman from CBC Radio's The Current, and the three of us have been working together on this project for several months. Which all culminated in the Star articles and in John's broadcast on the Current, and of course our program on the Fifth Estate. We've been getting lots of comments, lots of feedback, lots of questions, so we want to be able to address a few of them. A few questions that came, and I'll mention some of the names here. That Rick Jackson was sending this one, Lisa May McKinnon sending a question. Really dealing with the question is, why were these parents on the radar of children's services here in Ontario and other parts of the country as well? Why were they there to begin with? Why were these parents being asked to submit hair tests to see if they were in fact abusing drugs and alcohol? What can you tell us about that, Rachel?
Well, we know that in a lot of the cases that we've looked at anyway, there are lots of factors that explain why parents are on the radar of Children's Aid Society. So it's not that randomly, these parents are being selected off the street by social workers who are snipping their hair and then testing them, and then all of a sudden their kids are getting taken away.
Right, and I think that is the impression that some people had, that somehow the social workers were just showing up and forcing them to submit these for this hair test analysis. But it's true, I mean, and this was mentioned in the Lang report and the commission that looked into these backgrounds of these families and the methodology at the lab. These were marginalized families, these were vulnerable families, often, at the lower end of in terms of their socioeconomics. So these were troubled families to begin with. The hair test ended up being one factor that was used in that. Is there anything you want to add to that?
Yeah, and one of the things that really struck me is, yes, a lot of these families were struggling. Maybe it was specifically drug or alcohol dependency issues. Maybe there might have been domestic violence in their family. Poverty is often an issue that pops up again and again. But what the impact of these tests was, it took away people's ability to correct the situation. Mm-hmm. Like, it really seemed like people there was no opportunity for redemption. If you have a drug and alcohol problem and you are facing the prospect of losing your children, for a lot of people that will be the impetus to turn their lives around. And in the parents that we spoke to, that's what they said they did, but the test said otherwise. And at that point, it becomes not an issue about the drug tests and the results of the drug test specifically and only, but it becomes a credibility issue, right? All of a sudden, these parents, and we spoke to parents who said this, is not only was I a drug addict suddenly, but I was also a liar who couldn't admit, I was in denial and stuff. So it goes beyond simply what the test purported to say.
Yeah, and that tainted the whole process, and I think that the fairness of the process that these parents were hoping for, and because that was another question that had come up from some of our viewers too, is why can't we go back now and retest the hair to find out whether in fact this person was abusing drugs or alcohol? But we can't turn back time on that.
Well, we know that the lab did not hold on to the samples. Their retention policy was way out of line with the rest of the hospital, and they held on to samples sometimes for 6 months or a year, despite the fact that a lot of these cases, were winding their way through the court system. So it's actually impossible to go and test and say, at that specific moment where the test said that you were, let's say, a chronic cocaine abuser, were you in fact, is that correct? Mm-hmm. So, you really can't turn back the hands of time and do that test again.
Yeah, and I think, judging by some of the comments and the tone of a lot of the comments, is they're hoping there could be some sort of way to right the wrongs here and give these people a second chance. But in fact, that ship has sailed for these people, well, and that's part of their problem too.
There's this expectation that it can be fixed, right? I mean, why can't, if there was a mistake made, why can't you go back and figure out what the mistake was and correct it? And this case, like these cases of Motherisk, is a perfect example of there aren't really viable solutions in all these cases. Really, we can't know in any individual case if the test was right or wrong. And then there's the issue of what do you do now after we've established that unreliable, inadequate hair tests were used and may have had an impact in the judge's decision. Well, can people get their kids back? That's not a simple question to answer.
Good afternoon, Motherisk, Chris speaking.
Motherisk began in 1985 as a helpline for women who wanted to know about the risks of alcohol, drugs, and medication during pregnancy and breastfeeding. The program, the brainchild of physician and clinical toxicologist, Dr. Gillian Corin. The other thing, too, which we got a lot of questions about, it was consequences for the people involved running the Motherisk lab, notably Dr. Gillian Corin. What do we know about that now?
Well, we know that Dr. Corin is, he's under investigation by the College of Physicians and Surgeons of Ontario, so that's Ontario's medical regulator. In March, they confirmed to us that they are investigating Dr. Corin, which was a rare step because they don't normally say publicly that they're investigating.
Yeah.
That being said, it's been, what are we, 6 months now? And they say that they have nothing to add. However, the investigation is still ongoing, so we'll see where that lands. And then there's also the class action lawsuit. It's a proposed class action lawsuit, in addition to at least 10 individual lawsuits with something like 275 named plaintiffs. And Dr. Gillian Corin, Joey Guerreri, who was the lab manager, sick kids, and in some cases CASs are also named in those lawsuits. And should be noted, when talking about the future of Dr. Corin, he is in Israel right now. We did get a letter saying, can he be extradited? I don't think we're looking at any situation like that. And in terms of his professional future here in Canada, if in fact he is disciplined by the college, I'm not sure what kind of bearing that'll have on him anyway, because I don't think he will intend to continue his medical career.
I mean, he effectively retired in Canada and continued to work in Israel, but I think for all intents and purposes he's done his work here in this country, would you say? Yes?
Well, I mean, he does still have, according to the CPSO, they list the profile information online, and he still has an active, valid license to practice medicine in the province. So, and as we've seen as well, he continues to speak on the international speakers circuit and showing up at medical conferences. So he is staying active in that sense. It should also be said that there are a few individuals, including a few lawyers, criminal defense lawyers in Toronto, who say that a perjury investigation is warranted into some statements that Dr. Corin made on the stand in a 2009 criminal case involving a Toronto mom. Actually, it was the case that blew open this whole scandal in 2014. And so, they're also calling for that. The lab's credibility was put on trial in a Toronto courtroom during an appeal of a criminal conviction. Tamara Broomfield had been convicted of feeding her infant son a near-lethal dose of cocaine. The conviction based largely on the expertise of Dr. Gillian Corin. The director of the Motherisk lab testified the hair test analysis revealed the 2-year-old boy had ingested high doses of cocaine for 15 months. It was a shocking revelation. And that was something that we all mentioned in our stories, which was looking at the Colorado case, because you were here, sent us a note and said, how could it be that for 20 years after Motherisk its reputation was shot down in a Colorado court, how did it continue to carry on, and nobody in Canada seemed to know about what happened in Colorado? The two of you found out about this Colorado case. So I guess it really begs the question, if you could find out about what happened to Motherisk's reputation in the Colorado court, why didn't authorities in Canada find that out? But tell us how you found that out.
Well, I mean, we know for sure that at least one employee of Motherisk knew what happened, because she was the one that went down and testified in this case in Colorado. And we were in the bowels of the Ontario Court of Appeal several months ago going through transcripts from this case involving this mother, Tamara Broomfield, who had been convicted on a number of charges, including the notion that she had fed her son cocaine continuously over more than a year, and that was eventually thrown out in 2014 on appeal. And we were going through the testimony that Dr. Corin had testified at that trial, and he, in the voir dire, in this hearing that they had within the trial in which he was being qualified as an expert witness to testify, that there was questions about, are you qualified to testify? And in his answer to that, he mentioned that, Motherisk's testimony was accepted by courts all over Canada and also in the United States, and it was the judge actually that asked him to elaborate on the U.S., and that was when he mentioned that there was a case in Colorado that not only what he said basically was not only was that our testimony and evidence accepted, but the verdict turned on what happened. And I remember, we just were going through, reams and reams of documents at the time, and that kind of stopped us because, Colorado has the death penalty.
Yeah.
And my initial reaction, if you take it what he said at face value, was that there might be someone sitting on death row in Colorado in which Motherisk testimony had helped put him there, had some impact on the decision. So we were really, really interested in finding out if there was a case in Colorado, and more, if there had been a case in Colorado in which Motherisk's evidence had been accepted. But that turned out to be really difficult. I mean, you put out scores of phone calls and emails trying to find that, and we were never able to find that case, a case in which Motherisk's testimony had been accepted, but we found something else.
Yeah, and it was interesting because, like John said, we were looking for a conviction. So all of our searches that we did, through our libraries and online legal databases, calling lawyers, we were asking about a conviction. And then, it was, I like to call deep Googling, looking on like the 21st page of the Google search. And it was a Google Books, it was a reference to some footnote in a book about hair testing, and it said that hair testing evidence had been thrown out in a 1993 case in Colorado. And I just thought, maybe this is the case. Like maybe this is something. It didn't mention Motherisk, and so we looked up that case and found it had the case reference. The People v. Alan Thomas Jr. or whatever, and from there, again, we went through about 3 more steps until we could finally figure out that the lawyers on that, who the lawyers on that case were. And again, bear in mind, we still didn't know this was Motherisk, but we just thought a lot of the other things added up. Like this was it met a lot of the elements that Corin had described. For example, it was an individual who said that he was addicted to cocaine, and the hair testing evidence had been used to show that. So one of the defenders, the public defenders on that case, the lead public defender, had died a few years earlier, but the second public defender, I called him, and immediately he called me back and said, "Oh, I remember Motherisk." And then the really incredible thing is that we were able to get these transcripts for free from Colorado. The court emailed them to us once we isolated where they were, and from there, the story is in the transcripts, really, and it's a story about how, in fact, it's just the opposite of what Corin described. And I think what needs to be said is we don't know if there's another case. Dr. Corin didn't respond to requests for comment. The hospital didn't respond to requests for comment. We did do as much as we could to look in Colorado. We asked all kinds of public defenders and prosecutors, DA's offices. I think we contacted 5 or 6. Yeah. And we haven't been able to find a case any other case, criminal case, in which Motherisk evidence was used. But I think it needs to be said that, all we know is that it was thrown out in this case. And if, in fact, this is the case that Corin was referencing, then there were some real questions about the comments he made on the stand.
I think one other thing, too, to note is the district attorney on that Thomas Jr. case made the point that, this happened very early. We know it was the first time that the Motherisk official had ever testified in public in a criminal case, so it wasn't before that. And her point was given what the judge's ruling was, it's highly unlikely that anyone would go back to Motherisk again, given the problems that unless they had made substantive changes to the protocols and procedures that they had. Which they hadn't. And the one other thing that we should know, too, because there has been some discussion by one of Ms. Broomfield's appeal lawyers about the need for a potential, or suggesting that there might be grounds to launch a perjury investigation, given what we know Corin said and what we've learned about Colorado. It wasn't Corin that testified in Colorado. It was another official. It was his lab manager at the time. And so the question becomes, what did she tell him? And we asked her, we asked Corin, neither of them would answer our questions. So at this point, we can't really say how much he knew, other than the information that he gave to the court in 2009 was not, it did not reflect what we have learned about the only case that we've been able to find in Colorado that involved Motherisk.
Well, it was a critical case that certainly would have changed the reputation of Motherisk in Canada had Canadian authorities known about it, but they didn't. And
it was at the very, very beginning. We know now that This happened in 1993. Motherisk had barely done 100 hair tests. They would go on to do at least 35,000 hair tests.
Yeah.
It was the third or fourth test they'd ever done on an adult, so it was at the very, very beginning.
But the problem that was exposed in 1993 would be the problem that would be repeated over and over and over again about the tainted test and the flawed process that they had.
And I think one of the real lessons too is when you look at that testimony, you see that the questions that the DA was asking, those questions just weren't asked. If those questions had been asked in criminal cases, we may be, we wouldn't be sitting here today, I'm guessing.
Someday.
The loss of their child is a wound that time can't seem to heal. It's left a sister wondering if she'll ever see her baby brother again.
I worry about my daughter. I worry about how it's affecting her. She keeps quiet, she doesn't talk much about him. I think it hurts for her to even think about him. During the nights when she says her prayers, she'll ask God to hurry up and let him come back home.
If you want to see the story, certainly on the Fifth Estate, you can watch it on our website or on our YouTube channel. It's Tainted Tests and Broken Families. Toronto Star, access Rachel's work, and the Current and access John's work. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks for watching.